Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So I thought that I would do a little prediction video on this. This fight has actually snuck up on me. I did not know when this fight actually was going to happen because I believe this fight was moved around so many times. But the fight that is happening, that is finally happening between Errol Spence Jr. and Danny Garcia, I believe is happening this weekend on December 5th. So it should be a very interesting fight overall. I think that both gentlemen have a dog in this race. I think both of them have, well, of course, they have a dog in this race, but what I mean by that is that I do think both fighters actually have a chance in here. Now, of course, the projected winner is going to be Errol Spence. And if you just want my quick prediction, do I believe that Errol Spence is going to win the fight? I do believe most likely Errol Spence Jr. is going to win the fight. I just think Errol Spence is too powerful. I think Errol Spence is too skilled. And when it comes down to it, Danny Garcia, he is a very good fighter. He is an A-class fighter, but he is very flawed. He's just a little bit too slow compared to some of the other welterweights. It's not that he's super slow. He might even be faster than Errol Spence Jr. But when it comes down to it, the major problem with Danny Garcia, I shouldn't have even said overall that he's too slow compared to Errol Spence Jr. A big problem with Danny Garcia that I just see with him, he just does not throw enough in his biggest fights. Danny Garcia likes to rely a lot on his counterpunching and his accuracy. And Danny Garcia does have very good counterpunching ability and very good accuracy. But when it comes down to it, in his biggest fights, his biggest mistake has been that he has not thrown enough. However, that being said, when I did see Danny Garcia in his last fight, I believe that was against Adrian Granados, Danny Garcia did look pretty decent. Well, actually, that may have not been the last fight he was in. I believe his last fight might have actually been Ivan Redkach. But when it comes down to it overall, Danny Garcia did look decently impressive against Adrian Granados. And one of the things that I noticed, and a certain amount of other people noticed, is that Danny Garcia's output was a lot more in that fight than it usually was in some of his other fights. And that's something that needs to happen if Danny Garcia wants to win this fight. He's going to have to throw a decent amount. I'm not saying put yourself in danger, but when it comes down to it, you are going to have to throw. It is what it is. Danny Garcia is going to have to throw in this fight. He's going to have to throw a decent amount if he wants to win this fight. Because Errol Spence also is a very accurate puncher, very decent counter puncher, maybe even better than Danny Garcia, most likely better than Danny Garcia. But don't underestimate Danny Garcia in this fight. Danny Garcia is a very tough guy. And even though I do expect Danny Garcia to possibly get hurt in this fight, I don't expect Errol Spence to knock Danny Garcia out. A certain amount of people might predict Danny Garcia to get knocked out by Errol Spence Jr. I don't predict that. And the reason why I don't predict that is because I've never even seen Danny Garcia knocked down. And I've seen him in there with some very tough punchers, and he has handled all of them. I've seen him in there with Lucas Matisse. I've seen him in there with Sean Porter. I've seen him in there with Keith Thurman, and he got knocked down 0 times with all of them. So Danny Garcia is a tough SOB. There is no doubt about it. Danny Garcia, I don't think is going to get knocked out in this fight. Would it surprise me if he got knocked down in this fight? If we saw Danny Garcia get knocked down for the first time in his career, that wouldn't surprise me. But when it comes down to it, do I expect Danny Garcia to get knocked down in here? No, because Danny Garcia overall does have in some way some sort of defense. And I don't know how Errol Spence also is going to handle Danny Garcia's power. We'll see how Errol Spence has recovered from that car accident. It'll be very interesting to see what Errol Spence handles in this fight because Errol Spence, he is a little bit hittable at times. And Danny Garcia, he can get in a firefight with you, but he also can box a little. So we'll see overall what happens. This is why this is such an interesting fight because although Errol Spence is a projected winner, Danny Garcia does bring some things to the table that might trouble Spence. He has very good counterpunching ability. He is probably going to be a little bit faster than Errol Spence Jr., at least hand speed wise. When it comes down to it, both of them can be, very hittable at times. And we don't know how Errol Spence is going to be after that recent car accident. I believe he had earlier in the year. If it wasn't earlier this year, then it might have been last year. I can't remember. But when it comes down to it overall, I'm pretty sure it was earlier this year in 2020. But when it comes down to it, hopefully Errol Spence recovers well. And although many of us look at this as a tune-up fight, this also is a very big, important tune-up fight. I would be surprised if Errol Spence was able to win this fight any more than 8 rounds to 4. And I think if he were, overall, then he would deserve a hell of a lot of credit for that. Even more credit than before for beating Danny Garcia because You know, we don't know how he's going to be physically. We don't know how he's going to be mentally. It should be a very interesting fight. I am looking forward to it. I do expect Errol Spence to win. I think this is most likely an 80-20 fight, and some people might look at that as me giving Danny Garcia even too much of a chance. But with Errol Spence's, long layoff when it comes down to it, with him being in a recent car accident, and also Danny Garcia just bringing some skill sets to the table that also might give Errol Spence some problems, this may be a very interesting fight indeed. We'll just have to see what happens. But anyway, it should be a very interesting fight. My prediction is Errol Spence Jr. I believe it'll be a unanimous decision. I believe it'll be about 8 rounds to 4, maybe even 7 rounds to 5. Danny Garcia does know how to box, so we'll see what happens. But it's going to be very interesting. I can't wait for this fight. But that's pretty much it for my prediction. I'm going to go with Errol Spence Jr. by 12-round unanimous decision. Anyways, guys, that's really about it for this. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see what happens this Saturday. I'll see y'all later.